Hey everyone, my name is Olaf, and today I'll teach you how to make this exact animation in Blender. You'll learn how to model it, how to rig it, how to animate it, and then at the end how to render it. It's going to be quick and easy, so let's get started. Okay, so start off by switching from Blend Render to Cycles Render for better shading, and click X to delete the default cube. Then go into Create and add a cylinder. Then click R, Y, then 90 to rotate the cylinder 90 degrees on the Y-axis. Okay, and then we need to go into edit mode and scale the object on the x-axis. So go to edit mode and make sure it's set on face select, and then select the face. And then click G, then X to grab the face on the x-axis, which scales the object on the x-axis. And then left click to confirm the scale. And then let's go back to object mode and scale it down. So click S to scale it down. And let's go back to edit mode. Okay, so the next step is to go to the top view, so numpad 7, then click numpad 5 for the orthographic view, and then click set for a wireframe. And then we need to go to the vertices selection, and then click B to box select. So we need to select some vertices on the top and the bottom of the cylinder. And once we have these 4 vertices selected on each side, we can extrude them on the x-axis, so click E, then X to extrude on the x-axis. And then left click to confirm. And then we need to fill the gap between the extruded vertices and the rest of the cylinder. So click set for solid view, then A to deselect everything. Then go to edge select, and then hold in shift while you select the edge on the top and the bottom, and then click F to fill the gap between them. And then go to face select and delete the face on the cylinder. And then go back to edge select and select the one on the top and the bottom. Hold in shift while you select to select multiple edges, and then click F to fill the gap. Now let's fill the half circle as well. So hold in shift and select the edges. And if you misclick, just click Ctrl C to undo the action, and then continue selecting the edges. And once you have them all selected, just click F to fill. And then we do the same for the other half circle. Just hold in shift, right click to select, and then click F to fill. Now let's fill the end as well. Hold in shift, and then F. Okay, so now we have the first object, which is the object that goes in and out of the engine box, as you saw in the final animation. So let's add a cylinder to connect it to the next object. So left click to move the 3D cursor, and then click Shift A and add a cylinder. And then click R, X, then 90 to rotate it 90 degrees on the x-axis. Then click S to scale down the object. Left click to confirm, and then click S, then Y to scale it on the y-axis. And I think I want to scale it a bit more on the y-axis. So click S, then Y to scale it on the y-axis once again. And now we need to go into edit mode. So go into edit mode, and then go to face select. And then hold in shift and select both ends of the cylinder. Then click N to open the transform settings and increase the increase value to 1, so that when we add the subdivision surface modifier, these faces will stay flat. And then increase the amount of subdivisions to 3. And then we can go back to object mode. You can also change the radius of the cylinder by clicking S, then Shift Y to scale the cylinder only on the X and Z axis. Okay, so let's add the second object. So click Shift A and add a cube. Then click S to scale it down. Then click S, then Y to scale it on the y-axis. And then click G, then Y to grab it on the y-axis. And left click to confirm as always. And then click S, then Z to scale it on the z-axis. And let's go into edit mode. And select the face and click G, then X to grab the face on the x-axis. And then the next step is to go back to object mode. And then select the cylinder. And then click Shift D to duplicate, and then click X to grab the duplication on the x-axis. and then again left click to confirm. Now, before we continue with the tutorial, it's always nice to have a save in case something crashes. So click Save As, and then give it a name, and save it wherever you want on your computer, and then click Enter to save the file. Okay, and then click Shift S, and move the 3D cursor to the selected object, and then add a circle, and then click R, X, then 90 to rotate the circle 90 degrees on the X-axis. And then switch to edit mode, and then go to vertices select, click A to deselect everything, and B to box select. Then click G, then X to grab these vertices on the X-axis. And this is the beginning of the mechanism for the rotation of the wheel. And then click S, then Z to scale them on the Z-axis, and then click S to scale the object down in general. Okay, so select these vertices and click F to fill. And then click B to box select and F to fill. And then select these vertices. And then again click F to fill. And select the half circle and click F to fill. And then click A to select everything. And then click E, then Y to scale them on the Y-axis. And you might want to scale the object down even more, because that's what I did in the final animation. And then click G, then Y to grab it on the Y-axis. And then we need to add the wheel. So we're going to add the wheel to the same object. So go down to edit mode. And then we need to add a cylinder. So click Shift A and then add a cylinder. And then click R, X, then 90 to rotate the cylinder 90 degrees on the X-axis. Then click S to scale it down. Then click G, then Y to grab it on the Y-axis. And then click G, then X to grab it on the X-axis. And then click G, then Y to grab it on the Y-axis. And click S, then Shift Y to scale it only on the Z and X-axis. Then select the end face. Then click G, then Y to grab it on the Y-axis. And then click E to create an extrusion. Then left click and then click S to scale up the extrusion. And then you need to left click once again and click E to create a new extrusion. And then click A to deselect everything, then hold in Alt and select the whole circle. And then click Shift D to duplicate, then click S, then Shift Y to scale the object on the X and Z axis only. And then we need to give the wheel some volume, so click E, left click S, then Shift Y to scale the extrusion on the X and Z axis only. Okay, and then select the face in the middle and then click Shift S to move the 3D cursor to the selected face, and then add a cylinder. Then click S and scale down the cylinder. Then click G, then Y to grab it on the Y-axis. And then we need to scale it on the Z-axis. So click S, then Z to scale the cylinder on the Z-axis. And then click S, then Shift Z to scale it only on the X and Y axis to make it thinner. Okay, and then click Shift D, and then click R, Y, then 90 to rotate the duplication 90 degrees on the Y axis. And if you want to select these two cylinders only, you can also select one of the faces and then click Ctrl L to select all of the linked faces, so that we get the whole cylinder. Then click G, then Y to grab them on the Y-axis. Okay, so the next step of the tutorial is to add the Subdivision surface modifier to the objects. But before we can do that, we need to add some increase values to the different edges. But let's just make a save before we continue, in case something crashes. Just give it a new name so that we get a separate file, and then click Enter to save. Okay, so let's start off with the first object. So select the back, and then increase the increase value to 1, and then select these faces as well. And then increase the increase value to 1, and when we add the Subdivision surface modifier, these faces will stay flat, even though the rest of the object is higher poly than it used to be. Okay, so let's go back to object mode and select the cuboid. And then go back to edit mode. And then click A to select everything. Then click Ctrl B for bevel and use the mouse wheel to add additional edges. And we use the bevel to make the edges smoother, as you can see. And then we need to add mean crease to all of the round edges. So just hold in Alt and select all of these circles. Like this. And then increase the mean crease value to 1. Then click A to deselect. And then let's select these circles at the middle of the wheel. And this one as well. And increase the mean crease value to 1. And then A to deselect. And let's add the ends of the cylinders as well. Hold in Shift. Let's select the last face and then increase the mean crease value to 1 once again. And now let's go to Edge Select and select these edges around the object so that we can add the Subdivision Surface modifier to the whole object and make these circles smoother. Okay, and let's select this side as well. And deselect these two edges and then increase the mean crease value to 1. So that when we add the Subdivision Surface modifier, the shape is still the same, but the circles are smoother. And now it's finally time to add the bones. So let's just create a new file before we continue. And then click Shift A and add a bone. And then click R, Y, then 90 to rotate the bone 90 degrees on the Y-axis. Then click S to scale it down. Then enable X-ray so that we can see through the objects. And then click G, then X to grab the bone on the X-axis and make sure it touches the back of the cylinder. So let's switch to wireframe view by clicking Set. And then we need to extrude. So click E, then X to extrude the new bone on the X-axis. Then left click to confirm. And let's go back to object mode and click G, then set to grab the bones on the Z axis to make sure it's in the middle of the cylinder. And then go back to edit mode and click G, then X to grab it on the X axis. Then click E, then X to extrude it once again on the X axis. And extrude it to the next cylinder. Left click to confirm. And then click G, then Y to align the bone with the object it's going to control. So G, then Y, and then left click to confirm. Okay, so now we need to add a second armature. So let's start off by moving the 3D cursor to the selected bone. So click Shift S and cursor to selected. And then go back to object mode. And then click Shift A and add a single bone. Then click G, then X to grab the bone on the X axis. And you can also click numpad 1 to go to the front view. So G, then X. And then left click to confirm and make sure it's in the middle of the wheel. And then click R, Y, then -90 to rotate the bone -90 degrees on the Y axis. And then go back to edit mode. And then select the end of the bone. And then click G, then X to grab the bone on the X axis. Okay. And then make an extrusion as well. So click E, then X to extrude on the X axis. Now the next step in this tutorial is to add bone constraints to the first armature, so that when the second armature rotates, the first armature moves back and forth, so that we get the machine-like animation that rotates the wheel. So let's go back to object mode, and then select the first armature. When we have the first armature selected, we need to switch to pose mode. And then select the bone on the right. And then go into bone constraints and add inverse kinematics. I'm not going to explain it in details, so just add the armature 001 and then add the second bone. Now the bone in the middle will follow the bone to the right, and the bone to the left will be elastic. So let's select the bone in the middle and then go to the bone settings, and then we need to lock the inverse kinematics. So lock it on the X, Y and Z axis, and then select the bone at the back. We'll lock it on the X, Y and Z axis as well, but for this one we will increase the stretch to 1 so that the bone stretches, which is important for the rig later on. And when we rotate the second armature on the y-axis, you will see that we have the same movement as you saw in the final animation at the beginning of the tutorial. So all we have to do now is first of all to save and give it a new name. And then we need to connect the objects to the bones. So select the object, then the bone, then click Ctrl P and set it parent to the bone. And do the same for the next object, and then the bone, then click Ctrl P and set it parent to the bone. And then one last time we need to do it for the wheel, then the bone, then click Ctrl P to set it parent to the bone. We also need to set the cylinder's parent to the object, so select the cylinder, then the object, then click Ctrl P and set it parent to the object, and then do the same for the first cylinder, then the object, and then click Ctrl P and set it parent to the object. And now when we select the bone and click R then Y, you will see that we have the correct animation. So now we're almost done with the tutorial, so let's just create a new save. You can also use the plus sign. Okay, so let's keyframe the rotation and animate it. So click I to keyframe the rotation, and then move forward in time, and then increase the Y rotation as many rounds as you want. Then click I to keyframe the rotation, and when we move on the timeline you can see the animation. Now since the animation is done, we can add the engine box behind the rig so that it looks a little bit better. So we need to move the 3D cursor. Let's select the object, then go into edit mode, then go to face select, then select the face, and then click Shift S to move the 3D cursor to the selected face. Then click Shift A and add a cube, and then click Set for wireframe, and then click Numpad 1 to view it from the side, and then click S to scale it down, and then click S then X to scale it on the x-axis, and then click G then X to grab it on the x-axis, and S to scale, and S then X to scale it on the x-axis, and then G then X to grab it on the x-axis. Now to make the edges a bit smoother, we need to go back to edit mode and then click Ctrl B and use the mouse wheel to add additional edges. And then we need to add a subdivision surface modifier, and you will see why very soon. So let's add the subdivision surface modifier and increase the amount of subdivisions. And when we go to face select and delete the front face, you will see that it actually turns into a circle hole. So let's scale down the circle hole by going to edge select, then holding Alt and select the whole circle, and then click S to scale down the circle. Okay, so now the modeling, rigging and animation is done. So now we can finally get into the lighting and the materials, and then at the end go into the render settings. So let's switch to rendered view by clicking Shift Z, and as you can see we have no lighting, so we need to go to object mode and then select the lamp and then turn it into a sun, change the size to 1, and then click use nodes, and then increase the strength to 7, and then click G to grab the sun and R to rotate the sun. If you have a GPU, make sure to use it so that you can render faster. If you only have a CPU, that's okay too. You can still render, but it's going to take a bit longer. And let's make the background completely white. As you can see, the background is white, and we have the lighting as well. Okay, so let's start adding the materials. Let's start off with the material for the box. So let's change to a principled material, and then let's change the color. Let's make it blue, and when you click Shift Z, you can see what it looks like in rendered view. Let's increase the metallic value to 1, and then the roughness to 0.3, and then the clear coat value to around 0.5. And you can just experiment with the different values and see what it looks like. And let's select the other objects as well and copy the same material. And then the wheel. And then the last object as well. Okay, so now we have the same material for all of the different parts except the cylinders. And this is what it looks like in rendered view. Now just experiment with the different colors and add whatever color you like. Okay, I think this looks great. And we might add some metallic to the principled shader as well. Then click numpad 0 to look through the camera. And then click Shift F to use the fly cam. And you move around with WASD just like in a video game on your computer. And you can turn on and off gravity by clicking Tab. Okay, and then we can move on the timeline. And as you can see, everything is within the frame of the camera. Now, before we go into the render settings, let's just make a few adjustments to the materials and add a material for the cylinders as well. So let's just test out different colors and then select the cylinder. Okay, and then add a new material. I'm just going to make it black. As you know, it doesn't really matter what color you add at this point, so just add whatever you want. And select the second cylinder as well, and copy the same material. Okay, so now let's select the main material again, and just test out the different colors, and I ended up with the blue material. Okay, so click the camera icon and go to the render settings and increase the resolution quality to 100%. And then for the output, just give it a name in a folder, wherever you want on the computer. And then click Enter to save. And this will be where the animation ends up once it's rendered. And then change the type to AVI JPEG. And quality to 100%. And then set the sampling to 300. If you have a slow computer, just leave it at 128. And if you have a GPU, set the tile size to 500. If you only have a CPU, just leave them at 64. Okay. And then to render the animation, just click Animation and it will start rendering. And that's it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it and I'll post a new tutorial very soon. So thanks for watching and subscribe.